let's try to start with the facts. What do we know?
Well, there are over 400 pages in the Robert Mueller report. Obviously, we haven't been able to read them all, but we have been able to read the conclusions that Robert Mueller, the special counsel himself, comes up with. That's without the White House spin, without anything that might have gone on before. And the conclusion simply is this one. It doesn't look good for the president, and his campaign doesn't look good in this report either. It is true that Robert Mueller, the special counsel, does not find that there was collusion between the Donald Trump campaign and the Russian government. That much is true. When the president says no collusion, he is right. But the Donald Trump campaign and Russian operatives got awfully close to colluding, according to the special counsel. They didn't in the end, maybe because the Trump campaign didn't want to, first of all, or was incapable of doing so. But there were, for example, contacts between WikiLeaks and the president's son, then the candidate's son, Donald Trump Jr., for example. Many attempts by the Russian government, by Russian operatives, are detailed by the special counsel Robert Mueller of how they wanted to somehow work with the Trump campaign and potentially collude with it. It didn't come to that in the end. Now, that's the first part of the Mueller report. The conclusion is no collusion. That is something that the White House is celebrating here today and was celebrating last month when the Attorney General William Barr published his first conclusions as well. The other part, of course, was this question. Was there obstruction of justice by the president? Now, the president says there was no obstruction, but he's not entirely right on that front because nobody really has made up their mind on that front yet except the Attorney General William Barr, who, of course, was nominated for that post by the president himself. Robert Mueller's conclusion is actually that he is unsure whether there was obstruction of justice and, in fact, wants the U.S. Congress to decide in the end. Now, the U.S. Congress hasn't been able to decide on that front. It has been the Attorney General who came up with his own conclusions. And what that means for us is this story will run and run and run. The U.S. Congress, and especially Democrats, will want to have their say. So this is a report essentially from a first read-through that we've made here and from the first conclusions that we're seeing from the special counsel that simply doesn't make the president look good. Yes, there was no collusion and there was no absolutely clear case of obstruction of justice, but still, it makes the Donald Trump campaign look very willing to work with Russian agents, and it makes the president look very willing to potentially obstruct justice. And maybe the biggest conclusion of all, which we forget about a lot of the time, is that this report clearly shows that there was extensive meddling by the Russian government in the US presidential election in 2016. Remember, that is something that the president has denied many times. It has become that little bit clearer again in the Robert Mueller report.
Yeah, there's this one anecdote, Philip, where WikiLeaks sends Donald Trump Jr. a password to access the website, put in trump.org, and then he told his campaign staff that he had successfully used that password.
Yeah, and I believe it was, in fact, used at some point by the Trump campaign. Now, all of this was, of course, at a very crucial moment during the campaign. This has to do with emails, first of all, that came from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, Mr. Podesta. Those were hacked by Russian groups at the time, not the Russian government itself necessarily, and were then released by WikiLeaks. There were others that came from the Democratic National Committee at the time of the Democratic Convention that also hurt the Hillary Clinton campaign quite seriously. What we're seeing in these communications between WikiLeaks and Donald Trump Jr. is a clear interest on behalf of WikiLeaks to work with the Donald Trump campaign. They, WikiLeaks, want the Donald Trump campaign to release those emails. The Donald Trump campaign also, of course, is interested in what is coming from WikiLeaks because they know that it could hurt their opponent's campaign in the final stretches. So we're very, very close to the two working together. But the conclusion, again, from Robert Mueller is that there was no collusion.
Yeah, and of course those other Trump aides, like General Flynn, like Paul Manafort, also mentioned extensively. Philip, moving ahead, you say it's going to be a long, lengthy process in Congress. Is it going to sway voters either way?
I don't think so at this point. I think both camps appear to be firmly entrenched. Certainly the White House is, the president is. They certainly are coming across as celebrating today, though when they look at the details of the report, they might not be. They will still be spinning this, of course, their way. And that essentially boils down to 3 points: that there was no collusion, that there was no obstruction, and that this is presidential harassment. All of these tweets coming from the president earlier today here at the White House. And indeed, the president, of course, mentioned that in an event just an hour ago here in the White House East Room. Now, the other side of the story are Democrats, of course, who are looking at this report and are seeing reasons to continue their investigations. The Robert Mueller one might be finished, but there are plenty still going on up on Capitol Hill. The judiciary committees are looking into this. The intelligence committees are doing the exact same thing. There have been calls today for, first of all, Robert Mueller to testify up on Capitol Hill. Also for the Attorney General, William Barr, again, to go in front of those same committees. So there will be many questions asked, especially from Democrats on Capitol Hill. And Democrats, essentially, they might look at this report and say there might be some good news here for Democrats when they want to go after the president, especially when it comes to the 2020 presidential election.
Philip Crowther reporting live from the White House. Many thanks for that update.